could you please tell me your name and a little bit about your experience in the AIM classroom?
My name is Pauline Galea, and I've been an AIM teacher now for 10 years. For the first 6 years of my career, I taught core French in Ontario. So that was for grades 4 to 8. And then I moved on to immersion and taught grade 1 immersion. And I successfully used AIM in my immersion program as well.
Wonderful. So you're a very experienced AIM teacher.
I think so. I like to think so.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to be to that point. Yesterday you got to hear Dr. Krashen speak,
Yes.
and he spoke about compelling input and being in the flow and lowering that affective filter. So students are just so comfortable, they don't care, they're speaking in target language, they have no care in the world, and they're into what they're doing so much that they are able to speak in that language without having any fear at all. Has that ever happened in your classroom, and could you tell me a little bit about it if it has?
Yes, it has, and I think AIM has been highly responsible for that dynamic occurring in the classroom. I've taught using two different methodologies. I've taught what we call the old way, which is a more deductive way of teaching.
What's deductive? Explain that a little bit.
Teaching deductively means you're teaching the grammar and all the grammar and language conventions first, and then expecting the students to be able to put that all together like a well-made cake and all of a sudden be able to produce the language spontaneously. And in fact, that's how I learned to speak French, and it's a methodology that doesn't work very well at all. So then AIM came along and flipped that whole paradigm teaching methodology around, and what AIM did was said, okay, we need to start teaching a second language the same way we learn our first language, which is we use it. We use it. We learn what sounds right. We learn what feels right. And there's no explanation of grammar rules or no explanation of language conventions at all.
In the
comes
beginning,
later.
right.
Yeah, so in the beginning, it's just using the language all the time. It's like driving a car. I always use the car analogy, and it makes good sense because I can drive a car, and I've been driving a car for many, many years, but I'm not a mechanic, so I don't know the mechanics behind how the car operates, but I can still drive a car and drive it very well. So I like to look at language and teach language using that metaphor. I like my kids to be able to come in and use it because it empowers them and makes them feel that they can do it. And they do. They get out there and do it. And they're not thinking about doing it. They're just doing it. So they're not stopping to analyze, which is deductive. So they're not stopping to analyze, because when you stop to analyze something, am I using the passé composé? Am I using it right? Did I conjugate that verb correctly? When you're stopping to do all that in your mind before it even comes out of your mouth and you're doing all that processing, it's like hitting a wall.
Right.
So when kids come in and they're just saying, je suis allé, they have no idea that they've used the
Passé composé.
right, or even how to form the passé composé. They don't know that I've used, the present tense of avoir and the participe passé for the, the present tense for être, and the participe passé with the verb aller. They don't know all that. We know that because we've studied it, but they just use it and they know it sounds right. They know that je suis allé sounds right and j'ai allé doesn't sound right.
Right. From hearing it from all your comprehensible input, because they've heard it from you hundreds of times.
Exactly, and we're using it over and over and over in the classroom when we're just using it. We're using it in spontaneous group work. We're using it in the teacher-led activities when we're all sitting together in a group at the carpet, and I'm doing the gestures and everybody is speaking chorally. Everybody is asking the questions together. Everybody's answering the questions together. So it's not like I'm asking a question and pointing at the odd child saying, okay, your turn to answer and your turn to answer. That causes a lot of anxiety in second language learners, because you sit there and you go, oh no, she's going to call on me, and you get so stressed out because you don't want to answer in front of the class.
Yeah, AIM really takes that element out.
It does. It takes the fear away. So when everybody's speaking chorally during teacher-led activities, if a child makes a mistake, nobody hears it. Only the child hears it, and then they self-correct on their own. And so it's very safe. It's very empowering for the child, because they get to self-correct in their own time, in their own way. Nobody hears it except themselves. And then because we do pleasant repetition, which means we do the same thing over and over and over again for great practice, it gives them a chance to really internalize that,
Right.
and internalize how to say the things correctly. And then before you know it, they're just speaking, and they're not having to stop and think about it. It's just coming off the
Right.
same way we've learned our maternal language.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any one, I'm sure there's hundreds, but can you think of just one example in your classroom where you guys maybe went off on a little tangent because it was interesting to a student, or something was going on where spontaneously you just had a conversation and they were just also engaged, also into it? I know I'm putting you on the spot to think of one quickly off the top of your
Yeah,
head.
that's a hard one to do because my kids just speak French all the time in the classroom.
So it's all the time.
It's all the time. It's not like it's a aha moment. I do have one aha moment I'd like to share with you about a student I had, and she had some very special needs. She was a non-communicative student, so she had no verbal skills.
In her first language.
In her first language,
Okay.
yeah. So she had some significant special needs, and she was in grade 3, which is about 7, 8, 9 years old, and she had the mental functioning of an 18-month-old. So that's why she didn't have verbal skills, and she had anger too. So because she couldn't communicate, she would lash out at people.
Wow.
Well, I had her in grade 3 French, core French class, and of course I was doing AIM. So she often sat beside me because we had to keep the areas that she moved around the classroom. We had to keep her like in certain areas so she wouldn't hurt other students. So one day her EA, she had an educational assistant with her all the time. So one day her EA came up to me and said, "You know, Madame," I won't say her name, I'll just call her Kay. Kay looked at me this morning and went, "Cochon." And I went, "You have got to be kidding." So even though she was really not engaged in the classroom much, and she didn't communicate the same way the other students communicated with me in grade 3, she had learned the gesture and the word, and it was some of the very first words she ever spoke.
She never spoke in her first language, and yet
Not
in the
much.
AIM classroom, she
Learned
just out of the blue said
Cochon.
pig in French.
She
Oh my
did.
gosh.
And by the end of the year, we had her speaking in a few sentences. So she knew that if it was her turn to get a candy, like because I give candies out in my classroom, very structured giving out of candy, she learned how to come up to me and say, "Est-ce que je peux avoir un bonbon, s'il te plaît?"
Oh
She
my
could do
gosh.
the gesture the entire sentence, and she could say the entire sentence.
Wow.
So as a teacher in my career, that was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, to have just reached that child on that level.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
It is amazing. And I think if I can reach a child who has a specific disability of that level, on that level, with AIM, I can teach anybody.
I know. That's amazing.
It is
What
amazing.
a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for sharing your expertise as an AIM
welcome.
teacher.
You're welcome.